We've been speaking to a range of analysts, and we have Dr. Sam Amadi, our very own Arise analyst from Abuja, discussing with us the fallout of the elections. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Dr. Sam Amadi. It's going to be a very busy week. We still expect results trickling in, but can you give us your own 2 cents on the election exercise that transpired and whether or not you think there were some gains that were made amidst some of the backlash that we're seeing?
Well, thank you. Well, of course, some gains in terms of outcome, not process. We see the same level of flawed process. We see, in some cases, worse than February 25th. First, gains. I think the fact that some states we've seen incumbents lose, particularly Chimaroke losing the Senate seat in Kano East, I think it's the kind of reflective of what we think is the popular rejection. So outcomes like that matter. We've seen a young 26 or 20-something-year-old boy defeat a perennial legislator in the northern state, who is the speaker, by the way, defeated. We've seen good results. In Enugu still, the brother of the deceased, the senatorial candidate who was assassinated, politically killed in Kano West, in Kano East for the Labour Party, winning. So there have been some measure of outcomes that one can see positive. We've seen also incumbents hold strong. We've seen Abdullahi Sule retain his power, his position. We've seen Zulum return. But again, the whole process is really what's worrisome. The last election, we talked about INEC's deliberate, undermining of the credibility of the election by not doing what the law says should do and what itself it committed to doing, which is electronic transmission. But what we have seen in this governorship election has been instances of brigandage of high level. You see, in February 25th, we didn't hear so much about killings. In Imo State, for example, the video is out there about the deputy speaker who went around terrorizing the neighborhood to ensure that he wins, and ended up pulling a personal revolver and shooting someone. The news was that he was arrested, although whether he's still under some kind of police custody or interrogation or even prosecution. So we've seen Punch, several papers have reported about 10 persons killed. The traumatic one in River State of a young boy who works here in Abuja and went to do electoral duties or votes, whatever, and was shot dead. So several of those issues raise questions around Nigerian democracy. Now, before now, there's a debate whether Nigeria is even a democracy. I think we can say conclusively that Nigeria is not a democracy. The basic minimum of democracy and the democracy's chief virtue is that somehow people get to change the governments they don't want. Somehow people get to elect those they want to be elected. Not because they are strong, not because they are powerful, but just that people choose them. In fact, sometimes those choices might even end up being suboptimal. They end up not producing a result. But the democracy's chief merit is that it provides that framework by which people make those choices. And again, democracy's chief virtue, many scholars and practitioners have said that democracy does not really guarantee us much. But what it does give us is conflict resolution. Society is struggling to find how do we elect those who will govern us? How do we, ask A to govern instead of B? And the only legitimate process for that conflict management is free and fair elections. So people get to reconcile themselves with the fact that we try to choose Mr. A, but more people choose B. Therefore, B is legitimate. And that's what gives democracies its stability. The fact that it's a very efficient conflict resolution mechanism. Now, in this election, we have seen that several cases across the country, whether Lagos or Imo or even Rivers, or even some part of northern Nigeria, you see that governors, entrenched politicians have leverage on state institutions to prevent that contestation. Contestability is the heart of democracy. That somebody who is nobody could challenge the incumbent, the governor, and if the people so wish, he uproots or dethrones the governor. So the fact that Nigerian state is such that the state institutions, whether the police, if you look at the reports coming, some of the videos, real time, you see that the police, the critical institutions that drive this fairness and competition of election, the INEC itself, the electoral umpire, the police that ensures that nobody uses violence to write results, to cut away ballot boxes, or to destroy the ballot electoral instruments, become the ones that are used to facilitate. So the key thing coming out of this, just last week, VDED, which is Predictor of Democracy, published by University of Gothenburg,
Dr. Amadi,
described Nigeria from 2022 now as electoral autocracy, meaning that our elections really are not democratic because they don't allow for people to freely vote. Look at Lagos, for example. In spite of the outcome,
I was just going to ask you about Lagos, Dr. Amadi. Allow me to quickly interrupt you very briefly. Now, before the election, it was said that the youths would channel the anger of NSAS into actually voting out bad governance, not just in Lagos, but in the whole of the country. Now, did you see that play out in terms of voter turnout, in terms of youths not selling their votes, defending their votes? What's your assessment? First,
youths can only change outcome if they are enabled. I'll give you an example. On the morning of Saturday, I got a call from my cousin who lives in Ijegu in Alemosho. And he told me, say, sir, we came out, they are shooting. They don't want us to vote. They are shooting us. I was hearing gunshot. I said, go back inside. Now, who would ever go to vote? Young people, only their views, their impressions, their intellect, they're going to go out to vote, and then they are accosted with gunshot violence, they're going to go in. So the assessment of voter turnout in this election is now falsified because turnout cannot be measured anymore by those who voted. Many people probably would have voted, but they are not allowed to vote. And the thing about not being allowed to vote really is that, look, there are 3 levels of disqualification. We've talked about age, and now age is okay, 18 years. We talked about INEC not doing all year-round registration. Some people who could have registered didn't register, so they are disqualified. Legitimately so. We talk about voter collection, voting card rollout. Hurdles and hurdles and hurdles, and the court saying you can actually vote with temporal or any other identification. That's also a hurdle. But when people have all this, have run all these hurdles, and they have the voter's card, and they step out to vote, and they are stopped. Let's forget the ethnic profiling. Let's just forget for the fact that they are stopped, because many people who are not Igbos, who are even Yorubas, or who are all kinds of people, may have been stopped by the militarization of elections. Now, what you have seen is that we talk about voter turnout. It might be low for several reasons. One of the lowness is this is not civil anymore. The risk factor in going to vote is very high. The fact that their vote may not even count is very high. I called another relative. I said, how is the election going? He said, we have voted. We are waiting for decision makers. Now, look at it this way. Voting is different from counting. The decision makers decide whether your vote counts. So we are seeing stories around whether it's Abia where struggle over Obiungwa is delaying the election because some people want to sex up that number to win, to basically plug defeat, victory from the jaw of defeat. We've seen several other places. Enugu is still in play because of this allegation. So the real question for us as a country now, and this is very distressing, the impact of this election, it's not just about who wins. It's about whether tomorrow we improve economically, socially, and politically. And so far, what I'm seeing, honestly, is that we have created more room for militancy, for distrust, for violence, subversion, because even at local level, states now, there's open warfare. People who feel they were cheated Maybe you declare a governor who people feel did not win. Kaduna State is still under crisis. Election has finished for 2 days. We can't get a result because people insist either in changing the results or doing something different, or the results being uploaded like in Imo State, a particular state, the results being uploaded on IRF is different from what INEC is calling. So these very fundamental flaws tell us just one story. It cannot be that INEC or the police or the government lacks the capacity to manage election as a project. What it is, and that's what everything tells us, is that the association between politicians and criminals in society have mutated to a point where election itself, as a contest for power, is now a criminal exercise at different level of criminality, starting from fake registration, starting from ensuring that maybe sometimes the officials don't come on time, they won't start the process, scaring voters from coming to vote where you think you will lose, and ensuring that the ballot, like some cases, they take the coalition officers from the place where they're supposed to collect the election to a different location. The one of Isunkwere Nwangele, where the deputy speaker himself was shown a video with guns carrying people away. How can you run an election in that way? So what we are walking ourselves into is that we're going to see a much militarized society. We have seen a high level of illegitimacy. So people will sit in their home and disregard governors, disregard presidents. Now, in modern 21st century, you don't govern with guns. You govern with legitimacy, with persuasion. So if you run an election, we have people totally angry. How can they really support government to drive these economic theories we're talking about? These technical issues require one thing first. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I want to ask you just about Ogun State in particular, where, Governor Dapo Abiodun, he won, but it was pretty tight. It was, as they say in English football, squeaky bum time. But the metrics from Ogun State, they are, I don't know, they're not bad. Unemployment is 16.3%, almost half of the national average, well below, which is 33%. Unemployment is in single digits. And I think with respect to IGR, if we take a look at the revenue breakdown for Ogun State, I think Ogun State's internally generated revenue, I think the ratio is 53% to 42 or so, if we can take a look at that. Ogun State's revenue, they bring in more revenue from their internally generated revenue that compared to their FAC allocation. So Ogun State is not necessarily doing that badly. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on why the governor, at least economically speaking, why the governor, I guess, why it was so tight or so close for him.
Very good question. You see, people say, if it's not broken, don't mend it now. Obviously, Ogun State has a very geospatial advantage. It's properly located. IGR is after Lagos and Port Harcourt at the River State. I think the next is Ogun State, if not more. So it's not doing badly in terms of economics. But again, the governor may not have legitimacy in terms of wide approval, maybe because of, don't look at only the figures, look at governance as mode of engagement, communication. They look at the socio-economic issues around maybe context of social groups who want maybe, in some states you see issues around zoning, issues around maybe the political parties and the competition, and then of course issues around the personalities involved, like the former governor Mosu, strong, who has been stubborn, who has refused to, work with this particular government and his party. So all those factors contribute. But again, back to the small number. In other democracies, certain level of victory calls for some level of recount. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, we don't have provisions for recount. And the idea is that if you look at, there are some states where there are massive cancellation of election. I think somewhere in the northern Nigeria, you see the votes cancelled in one local government is enough to offset the advantage that the winner has. In those elections, you have to go back and look at those cancellations to ensure there are no manipulation. Because if you cancel votes in a large voting area where Mr. A is supposed to win and Mr. B wins A with far less than you have cancelled, there is a question around looking again and say, these cancellations, were they really done to offset advantage and create that weakness or disadvantage. So I think that there are three things here. One is that we distinguish between fraud and manipulation. Fraud, electoral frauds, the numbers are wrong, you put numbers are not voted for. Electoral manipulations are all these other practices, underhand practices to confer advantage. So Ogun State, strong economic posting in terms of, it's not a basket case, it's not some states that can't even pay salaries without federal allocation. It's doing very well in terms of IGR, of course, proximity to Lagos. Most of the Lagos operations, Ogun State is like people register companies in Ogun State, manufacture in Ogun State, maybe sell in Lagos. So both in terms of custom duties, in terms of collections for maybe taxes and all that. And then, of course, small businesses around the area, benefit from the knock-on effect of strong Lagos economy. But again, those things may not decide politics at the election. People may still have local grievances that shows in the narrow victory.
Well, fair enough. Thank you for that, Sam Amadi. Let's move on to Jigawa State. We're still analyzing some metrics there. We have some graphics going up on the screen. Jigawa State, Umar Namadi has been elected with 618,449 votes. Mustafa Lamido coming in a distant second, and Aminu Ibrahim coming in.
Distant.
Super distant.
My goodness.
I was trying to be nice about that. Okay, in terms of the GDP for Jigawa State, 2.16 trillion naira for 2021. Employment for 2020 was 38.69%. Underemployment, 41.29% for 2020 as well. Food inflation, unfortunate, 19.67% as of February of this year. Also, the headline inflation is 19.68% as of February of this year as well. So Jigawa State economic metrics coming in. Rodas, we're going to leave that to you to analyze.
Dr. Amadi, look, if you add unemployment plus underemployment in Jigawa State, that is what, 79? That is almost 8 out of 10 people in Jigawa State are either unemployed or underemployed. Can you briefly give us your assessment of how the economy of Jigawa State moves forward under the governor going forward?
First, like you pointed out, Jigawa is doing worse than national average in almost everything. I mean, underemployment, unemployment, I think unemployment may be close to Imo that has about 40%. Imo, understandable, large number of graduates coming out of the year and less employment. Now, if you look at inflation, this is double whammy. Inflation, food inflation, everything is high in Jigawa, bad, painting red. Now, again, the governor, former governor's son, is supposed to take over. A young boy, I mean, he had a sentiment of being a youth. But again, this is one result that one could call justice. Why should the governor, after 8 years, has his son in the House of Senate? One of them is going for Senate, whether he won, I didn't know. But now has his son to take over from him. And this is those, if you like, hegemony that we need to destroy for democracy to work. And again, this young man and his dad are facing criminal trial before Justice, I think, Ojukwu at the Federal High Court here for embezzlement when his father was governor. So this is now more like a family taking over the state. And if you look at this level of economic underperformance, you needed to have a governor that's going to come day one with a sense, not of entitlement, but a sense of duty, and who will consider that he could be voted out and work for the people. The dynamics of democracy for economic development have been shown. It's not about democracy. It's about that mechanism of responsiveness to the people. So with this result, with this index, we need a governor who doesn't have a sense of entitlement, and I think the Jigawa people got it right.
We do appreciate you coming on the program to have this very important discussion with us. Thanks for joining us on the program.